Ever feel like you're literally just running on a treadmill? Constantly chasing your goals, completely exhausting yourself, while your rivals just seem to effortlessly glide ahead? Well, if that sounds familiar, we really need to shift your perspective today. Welcome to our explainer on the 8th law of power: make people come to you. In this explainer, we're going to discover exactly how historical figures used bait, strategy, and emotional control to completely outsmart their opponents. Okay, let's dive into this. The essence of the 8th law is beautifully simple, but honestly, it's incredibly profound. It boils down to this: when you force another person to act, you are in absolute control. It's almost always better to make your opponent abandon their own plans and come to your turf. And if you have to, well, lure them with the promise of fabulous gains. Use bait. Why? Because the exact second they start moving towards you, they're reacting to your initiative. You're the one holding all the cards. To really wrap our heads around this, let's look at one of the most famous events in all of European history. I'm talking about 1815, when Napoleon Bonaparte made this daring, almost impossible escape from his exile on the island of Elba. Now, for centuries, this has been painted as a stroke of bold, aggressive genius by this legendary conqueror. But let's pause and ask ourselves a question. Was it actually a brilliant victory for Napoleon? Or was he basically walking blindfolded into a masterfully laid trap? Section 1, Napoleon's Grand Illusion. Let's look at the master trap. So, to understand how this trap worked, we have to rewind just a tiny bit to the Congress of Vienna in 1814. Picture this. The major powers of Europe are gathered around trying to carve up the remains of Napoleon's fallen empire, and they are absolutely terrified of his return. Then, in February 1815, right under the noses of British ships, Napoleon seemingly pulls off the impossible and escapes. He marches straight on Paris with a really tiny army. And at first, his strategy seems to work flawlessly. He reclaims the throne for 100 days of what was basically absolute delirium. But then, fast forward to June 1815. France is bankrupt, his resources are completely tapped out, and he is permanently defeated at Waterloo and sent to the inescapable island of St. Helena. Here is the crazy part. Napoleon didn't miraculously outsmart the British spyglasses. Not at all. He was deliberately allowed to escape. The real mastermind behind the curtain was his own former foreign minister, a man named Talleyrand. You see, Talleyrand realized that as long as Napoleon was sitting just off the coast on Elba, Europe was never going to have peace. But he couldn't convince the other ministers to move him further away. So, he orchestrated this incredibly elaborate trap. He secretly had visitors whisper promises of glory right into Napoleon's ear, making him genuinely believe that France was desperate to embrace him again. Talleyrand essentially set the house ablaze, just so he could permanently cure the plague. Look at the stark contrast in how these two operated. On one side, you have Napoleon, relying entirely on bold, aggressive, and highly emotional action. And on the other side, Talleyrand. He uses this incredibly patient, emotionally detached strategy that is focused purely on setting irresistible bait. The danger here is that Napoleon's aggressive action was mistaken for effective action. He literally exhausted himself reacting to unforeseen consequences, while Talleyrand just sat back, kept his cool, and let Napoleon completely defeat himself. This whole situation perfectly illustrates a philosophy echoed by other absolute master strategists throughout history. Take Otto von Bismarck in the 19th century. He famously said, "When I have laid beat for deer, I don't shoot at the first doe that comes to sniff, but wait until the whole herd has gathered around." I mean, wow. That is the ultimate expression of holding your emotions in check, right? It's all about fighting that burning urge to act immediately, and instead just waiting for the absolute perfect moment when your opponent is fully committed and totally vulnerable. Section 2, the mechanics of control. Let's break down the keys to power. So, how does this actually work in practice? Well, this law relies on a few specific psychological mechanics that you'll see in pretty much any competitive environment. We can think of them using the rule of threes. First, you absolutely must master your emotions. You just cannot let anger drive your decisions. Second, you want to force the opponent into your territory. Think about it. When they enter your hostile ground, they get nervous, they rush things, and they make silly mistakes. And third, you play right into their natural tendency to react angrily when pushed. By making them come to you, they end up burning all their finite energy on the journey, so they arrive completely exhausted while you're just standing there, rested and waiting. Section 3, the power of bait. Let's look at how universal this really is. Let's explore how different types of bait can completely force an opponent's hand in other domains. Take the trap set by Japanese Marshal Togo Heihachiro during the 1905 Russo-Japanese War. The Russians had a much stronger navy, so Togo knew he couldn't just fight them head-on. That would be suicide. Instead, he spread false information, essentially baiting the Russians into leaving the Baltic Sea. And because the British controlled all the quick routes, the Russian fleet had to sail all the way around the southern tip of Africa. Guys, that added over 6,000 miles to their journey. And what did Togo do? He just waited. By the time the Russians finally arrived, they were tense, exhausted, and incredibly overworked. The Japanese absolutely crushed them. Togo made them travel across the entire world just to fight on his terms.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how this same strategy is just as devastating when applied to money. Meet Daniel Drew. He was a 19th century stock market manipulator, one of those classic robber barons. He didn't use armies, obviously. His bait was pure greed. When he wanted to manipulate a stock, he'd rush through this really exclusive Wall Street club, wipe his sweating face with a red bandana, and conveniently let a little slip of paper flutter to the floor. The club members, thinking they'd just stumbled onto the inside tip of the century, would secretly pounce on it and buy or sell in massive troves. Their own greed totally blinded them. They played perfectly into Drew's hands and ended up doing all the heavy market-moving work for him.
And this happens on an everyday level too. Think about it. If you're walking through a busy train station and you see a big sign that says, "Beware of pickpockets," what's the very first thing you do? You instinctively pat your pocket just to make sure your wallet is still there, right? Well, guess what? The pickpockets are standing right there watching you. You just gave away the exact location of your valuables. You kind of dug your own grave just by reacting to environmental bait. In fact, clever pickpockets will actually put those signs up themselves just to make people come to them with the information.
All of these examples are so perfectly summarized by this amazing 11th century commentary on the art of war by Zhang Yu. He wrote, "When you induce opponents to come to you, then their force is always empty. Attacking emptiness with fullness is like throwing stones on eggs." It's such a brilliant metaphor. When your opponent comes to you, they're leaving their safe base, they're expending their energy, and they are becoming empty. Meanwhile, you, waiting patiently, remain entirely full. Section 4. Overhand forcing. How to demand respect. Now, we should mention that you don't always have to hide your intentions. Sometimes making people come to you can be a highly visible, undeniable power play. Let's look at the brilliant Renaissance architect Filippo Brunelleschi. He was hired to repair the massive cathedral dome in Florence, but the city officials also hired his well-connected but basically useless rival, Lorenzo Ghiberti, to work right alongside him. Brunelleschi wasn't having it. He knew Ghiberti would just take half the credit for literally none of the work. So right at the most critical moment of construction, Brunelleschi suddenly develops this mysterious illness. He basically just went to bed and told the city officials, "Hey, you hired Ghiberti, let him figure it out." And when Ghiberti predictably failed completely, the officials had to come crawling back, begging Brunelleschi to return. And he flat out refused until they fired Ghiberti. Amazingly, Brunelleschi miraculously recovered just days later. He gained overt, total control of the entire project without ever throwing a single tantrum.
Section 5. The strategic reversal. Knowing exactly when to strike.
Here is a crucial nuance we need to cover. A true master of strategy doesn't just follow the rules blindly, right? They know exactly when the context demands the complete opposite approach. Waiting and baiting, that is incredibly effective when time is on your side and you're at roughly equal strength with your opponent. But what if time is working against you? Or what if your enemy is clearly weaker? In that specific case, you use sudden speed. Leaders like Cesare Borgia used rapid, totally unforeseen attacks to just terrify and demoralize their enemies. Fast attacks fundamentally deny the other person time to think or plan. It immediately throws them on the defensive. So it's the exact opposite of waiting, but it actually achieves the exact same goal. It forces your enemy to respond on your terms.
The legendary boxer Joe Louis actually summed up this reversal perfectly with one famous line: "He can run, but he can't hide." If you sit back and let a much weaker opponent rest and recover, you are literally handing them an advantage. Instead, you have to strike quickly and violently, forcing the issue so they have absolutely nowhere to go. You always have to choose your tactics based on the specific reality in front of you. So what does this all mean for you? I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. In your next conflict, whether that's in a business deal, a negotiation, or just setting personal boundaries, are you going to exhaust yourself chasing your opponent across the map? Or are you going to hold your emotions in check and simply set the bait? The 8th law of power makes it clear that true control always belongs to the one who waits. If you found this explainer valuable and you want to master more game-changing strategies like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and visit our website for more comprehensive explainers. Until next time, stay focused and let them come to you.